I think we're on the other channel. It's not allowing me to go to the 11th house for some reason. I don't know why, but I think we're over on the 15-minute side of things. We are.
Yeah, it says you're live on YouTube now.
Yeah, but it's on the 15 minutes of flame side. It's not allowing me to go to the 11th house, and I don't know why.
Hmm.
So this is
I have a guess.
yeah, me too. So if you could alert people, maybe just go over to Facebook and let them know it's on the other channel today. I think that'd be a good place to start.
Okay.
And people will find it, just not as many people will.
Do you want me to alert people?
No, yeah, you're going to need to because it's a different channel.
How do I, what's the channel? What's the link?
Steve, can you send Richard the link to the 15 minutes channel if you can? And then just send it to his email address.
Well, do I go through YouTube for that?
Yeah, so you just go to the 15 Minutes of Flame channel, like the one we're normally on.
Okay.
And then just grab that URL and send it off to YouTube. By the way, we're streaming live. And I just wanted to say hello to everybody. We've hit a bit of an interesting snafu. I was talking with my good friend and first hour guest, Richard Grossinger, and we were just talking about traffic. And I said that that there was very little traffic on the highways, but it seems as though the information superhighway is not only crowded, but apparently it's quite convoluted as well. And for whatever reason, I was rerouted to this other channel that we're currently on. And, I'll try to fix this, in sort of the post experience, but at least we can get the stream going today. It's not going to be kind of on the main channel, but here we are, Richard, and thanks for being here.
Okay, I am trying to switch also my mailing out to people there. Steve sent it to me.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give me like a few minutes to just...
Yeah, tell you what, I'm just gonna talk and you do your thing, and send it out to your people. So this gives me an opportunity to be able to talk about the potential of riffing and being able to be nimble and being able to be spontaneous and ad lib and be improvisational, because these are qualities that I think they're going to be really important moving forward. Right. So we've been living in some ways in sort of a static dynamic of the universe, and that in some ways, and that static dynamic has become super static right now, but it's also becoming important to be able to be malleable and mutable within that field of stasis. And maybe that's something that Richard can ruminate on when he resends his email to his people.
Yeah, there are people are just writing and saying, I can't find it.
Right. There's a reason why. It's because the Deus Ex Machina has rerouted us. We've been talking about these two potential levels of reality, or two realities that we're kind of a part of right now. There's the why, not, the fork in the road, the proverbial fork in the road. And one reality path goes this way and another reality path goes this way. And apparently the bots, the machine elf bots have decided which path we're going on today. But we'll remedy that. And I apologize for everybody that's waiting for it over on the other channel. And but we'll get here. And Steve is doing the same thing. He's going over to Facebook and he's putting some links over on Facebook so that we can actually, alert people that, hey, we're over here, not over there. And who knows, maybe there's some interesting cyber wisdom that's associated with the event. And, one of the things that happened last week is that I had E. Michael Jones on, and we talked a little bit about sort of the miracle of catastrophe. And sort of how that went down, of course, is that he was essentially excommunicated from academia. And when it looked like it would be sort of one of the darkest hours in his professional career, it set him off on the path of a writer. And of course, Michael's been very, very prodigious with his work. Not everybody agrees with his work, but if you really look at it from the sociological, economic perspectives, I think it's untouchable. It's completely untouchable. So we talked a little bit about that, and how there seems to be kind of a wisdom and intelligence around this idea of catastrophe or collapse or calamity or tragedy, so that if we have something in our lives that looks a certain way and we attach to it and we view it in a certain way, then it becomes kind of a defining moment in our lives that locks us into a particular potential or a particular perspective or a particular point of view. If we're able to come at that event a little more loosely, it could give us an opportunity to have kind of a redirect or a pivot in a way that we may not have been able to experience as a result of that, right? So if we're locked in to kind of a static version of the universe and everything goes according to plan, theoretically, it doesn't allow us to evolve. It doesn't allow us to mutate and have a kind of a mutable shift in who we are and what we're doing and where we're going. And I have my own versions of that as well. And I'm sure a lot of you do. In fact, I just had a client before today's show, and a really interesting person, and spent the last 10 years basically in a form of recovery, and then helping her parents who were challenged around their health, their longevity. One of them recently passed, so now she has one parent left. We talked about kind of where we are now, and we talked about where we are in terms of the social and the spiritual and the psychological dimensions of our time. And I shared with her that there are going to be, that her life was a life in training in a lot of ways. And that by sort of experiencing the abnegation of achievement or the abnegation of the family, wanting to start a family because she had another family to take care of, that there was a certain level of development that she was not experiencing. And that's not, there's not a judgment on that, right? There's no judgment there. But had she gone down that path, like a lot of other people do, then what happens is that they wind up in a more kind of static environment. They have their, they have a job, they have a family, they have rituals, so they get put inside the hypercube, so that when something, catastrophic does happen, or when something tragic does happen, they have a very hard time dealing with the chaos. They have a really difficult time dealing with being able to handle a different version of reality. And it looks like Richard has completed his mission. I'm going to get right to him in a second. But I was listening to, I got your email. Thanks, Richard. I was listening to a talk show that I think comes out of Portland. I always forget these guys' names. Markley, Van Camp. There are these three guys. It's a nationally syndicated broadcast. They're on the conservative sort of talk radio spectrum of things. Markley, Van Camp, some other guy. And I've listened to them before, and I don't really find them interesting per se, but they're intellectual. They're funny. They kind of have the intellectual funny thing going on. And you could tell that these guys were not in agreement with whatever this coronavirus reality is. And they weren't in agreement with one of the or some of the things that we're not doing. And one of the guys, this would be a really great transition to Richard. One of the guys is a big baseball fan. And he's like freaking out because there's no baseball. And you could almost cut the tension in that studio with a knife, that they were not happy. And they were not in their kind of, they were not in their lane with this thing. So you can tell that the pressure was getting to them. And we all have tragedy and we all have misfortune. But some people have less than others. And in a lot of ways, it does not allow them to develop a kind of psychic immunity to being able to go through catastrophic or catalytic or even apocalyptic times. So why don't I stop there? Looks like Richard's finished his mission. And I think you caught a little bit about what I was talking about. Richard, you've had a lot of fairly intense things happen in your life. You've been very public about your evolution, your path. You lost a brother to suicide. You had a kind of an ignominious exile from your own family. And it's created who you are. It's created over 40 books and a volume of just a plethora of knowledge on a lot of different subjects. So I wonder if you could chime in and talk about sort of the redemption of catastrophe or the redemption of loss.
It's partly that we don't have a choice. You can follow it and like feel badly and feel like feel like it's just a downward spiral, that you're in the vortex and you're not going to get out. And well, you either go into the next universe and wake up there, or you kind of make a stand here. And I don't know exactly where that comes from, whether that comes from like past life subliminal messaging that comes through, or whether your guides like show you the signs, or whether it comes out of your own core somewhere. But there are these moments when everything is crashing and self-destructing, where you either there's no trick. It's not straight courage. It's not straight gumption. It's not straight stubbornness. It's something about receptivity and like intuition and just maybe flexibility. I'm just trying to think of the right words. It's definitely an improvisation that switches from moment to moment. I think of John Friedlander saying that every millisecond, with every decision you make, the universe re-optimizes itself for your meaning and spiritual freedom. And it does that for every sentient being in the universe simultaneously. And that's the universe, not NASA's universe or the Hubble telescope universe. That's the outer shell of the universe. But the real universe, the universe that we're in, that's connected by our guts and heart to some like core that's outside our neurological setup, that universe. We're engaged in that. So when something like this comes along, it's in both universes, like COVID. It's coming out of the esoteric universe. It's coming up through our like umbilicum to that universe. And it's also coming across the physical Darwinian universe, mutating by RNA and scanning and using that sort of algorithmic intelligence to read us. And doesn't that seem appropriate, since we're turning ourselves into algorithms now?
Yeah, absolutely.
People say people say the virus isn't intelligent. It's just a fragment of RNA. But what are we? Are we so intelligent with our, artificial intelligence algorithms and stuff?
Right. And there's even a debate now on the whole subject and meaning of what a virus is. It's like, I don't know if you follow John Rappaport at all, but John, you'd really like John. He's very interesting. Anyway, John and a number of other people, Dr. Thomas Cowan, we had Dr. Andrew Kaufman on last week. And this goes back to some of the theories of Steiner and Steiner's ideas of what a virus is and isn't. And Steiner, pioneered this idea that when we go through our crisis, when our cells go through a crisis, a bodily crisis, what they do is they excrete toxins. And these toxins, in many instances, have been misdiagnosed as a virus, as a viral kind of plague or attack on the body. And this fellow, Dr. Thomas Cowan, has looked at these various plagues as a result to the electrification of the planet, being things like the development of radio waves, the development of radar, the development of satellite technology. Now here we have 5G. So these things are very, very interesting, and it begins to have, and this is what a lot of the folks that follow this program and some other programs, what are we really dealing with here? Is this really a virus? Is it something that's sentient? Is it a byproduct of some form of AI and biological fusion? I mean, I think we're off in kind of a different territory now.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's a wider range of like possibilities and probabilities than I had considered before. But I certainly think that when you have like a mainstream rush, like we've got to judgment and categorization, that there's something wrong there, and it kind of radiates out. You might have seen some of the YouTube videos with emergency room physicians and other doctors who are treating this, who are saying this doesn't look like what they're telling us it is, and it's not responding in the way. There's one doctor who's on who it says the ventilators are killing people, but that's the wrong solution.
I actually have a little bit of a story to share with that. I got an email last night from one of my clients, and somebody who probably follows the show, and she lives in New York City, and her daughter is a nurse at one of the hospitals in New York City, and this is what she shared with me. She said there was a period where there was nothing happening, and then almost as if a switch got turned on, that the hospital that she was in was inundated with people. And the thing that troubled her daughter the most and really kept her up was not the sheer volume of the people she was dealing with, but what they looked like going through the crisis. She said that they had never seen anything like this before, that the hair on people was kind of standing up and out, and it was getting sort of loose and almost kind of like, Lady Frankenstein kind of hair effect. Yeah, and that the looks on their faces were transfigured, and not in a really good way. They were looking at kind of a different version of who these people probably were outside of the environment, sans this crisis or whatever. So something is going on here that is not part of the script.
Huh. It sounds it has a slightly Invasion of the Body Snatchers quality, doesn't it?
It does have that feeling to it, quality to it. One of the things that people may want to know about Richard, he's a Scorpio. So getting down into the depths is part of his code. And when you were talking about the downward spiral, you were talking about, in many cases, what addicts talk about, which is bottoming out, right? They have to bottom out to get somewhere. And this is Richard's new book, Bottoming Out the Universe. I think it's around book 41. And it's published using solar power. Congratulations, Richard.
Well, congratulate Inner Traditions on that. Yeah.
So Richard is a free agent now. He's been liberated from his very long custodianship of North Atlantic Books, and now you're doing some curating and writing and editing and publishing for Inner Traditions, right?
Yeah, under the Colophon Sacred Planet.
Yeah. So I want to go back to November when I was hanging out with you in the Bay Area, and you and I had lunch together, and you were in a really dark place. Like I've seen you, flirt with darkness, but this is a really, really dark place.
Real darkness as opposed to the flirtation.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Maybe give people kind of a Reader's Digest without downloading the whole thing.
Okay, I'll try. This is going to be a tricky one. Yeah, I come with like a marker that says this guy's going to have trouble. You mentioned my brother committing suicide. Actually, my mother first, then my brother, then my sister all committed suicide. I'm the only blood member of that family who hasn't. And I remember actually saying to a therapist I had seen, everybody says, you're doing really well by comparison. And I think, you don't know how hard this actually is. I've got the same programming and I just have to continually respond to it in a different way. And he said, well, fuck that. Everyone else is dead. And that's kind of how I feel. You don't get it. This thing actually kills, and it's killed everyone else. So I thought I was doing pretty well under the circumstances. I got my practices. I probably wrote too many books in an attempt to chase it and convert it. And I got through a lot of years. I stayed with a partner. I raised two kids who were both like amazing kids. One's a biologist studying, working, redesigning urban areas for resilience under climate change. The other, all I have to say, it's Miranda July, and that speaks to that.
Yeah, she's a brand unto herself.
Brand unto herself, and all of that, I kind of coasted a bit with the occasional total shunyata panic attack. And then kind of it all descended into me. I had a revelation and it all came much too close. And although we make up stories that we want to believe or that guide us or tell us, the story I told myself because it was told to me by different psychics. I did a bunch of psychic readings and shamanic journeys, and they all told me the same thing, which is you didn't incarnate fully. When you were born, the family was too dangerous. So you only incarnated part of yourself. And now the rest of yourself is here. And it's kind of in shock and appalled by it. And that sort of fit because I was saying I felt like a walk-in in my own body. And the notion that it wasn't a walk-in, but that it was me began to sort of make sense. And I had, by then, we had moved from Berkeley to Maine full time. And one winter under depression was, I thought winter was great after all those years in California, but one winter depressed, especially that far east and toward the Atlantic time zone, it made me feel I had to get out of there this winter. So we rented in Berkeley for the year and came back. And I mainly wanted to work with people. Found a great friend, Matt McKay, who was the publisher of New Harbinger and a longtime psychotherapist who works right now on the cusp of like spiritual initiation and psychopathology. And he was saying like, you've got so many symptoms of psychopathology, but I think it's a spiritual initiation. And I don't know, I just worked with it. I worked with it breath by breath, day by day, week by week, no hope, no sense of ever coming out of it. You saw me in that in November. And then this whole event that I can't really talk about, whereby I was kicked out of the organization, company,
Let's just say you were exiled from your professional life.
I was exiled from my professional life in a kind of very ugly coup, death wish coup, death wishing my death on me. I mean, that's what it felt like. Let's just say the left-wing version of Trumpiana.
Yeah, let's call this King Lear meets Antifa. Okay, this is what this was about.
And I couldn't sleep. I went through 6 straight sleepless nights, which I thought was impossible. But eventually, and I can't even say what was the tipping point. A bunch of things came together, and I looked and oh wow, I just came through that tunnel. I looked back, and the main thing was it had a shape. It wasn't just the abyss. One psychic friend told me about the abyss, that the thing about it is You can't go back to where you came from. You don't know where you're going, and there are no signs where you are. So,
Mhm.
the difference when you get out of the abyss is you actually can look back and see texture and um, and and kind of a journey that you have to take. And the journey is an instruction, a locution. And the instruction tells you things that you couldn't get under any other circumstances. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the darkness. And in terms of COVID, that's a collective version of the same journey. That whether you regard it in pure Darwinian terms as an unavoidable event of mutating amino acids chains, or you treat it as coming out of a 4 or 5 or however many dimensional field and morphing down into our dimension, our dimensional scale, it's still either way. And I think at the bottom of things, those interpretations meld together. Either way, it's something that can that meets us at the point of our collective depression, our collective hollow, and asks us to use our negative capability to emerge. To It gives us an opportunity to use the negative capability to emerge. And this wonderful new friend I haven't met, but this, I don't know what intuitive, she doesn't like to be called a psychic in New York, Laura Aversano, she says that this applies equally to the people who've crossed over, that they
Mhm.
are on the other side of the veil, also continuing to transform. So it's not like winners and losers here. It's a case of collective transmutation and collective engagement with an entity. I think before we actually went live, we were talking about, oh, you mentioned the chapter in my book on the corporate takeover of reality and um, and artificial reality. And the thing about this is in a time when fake reality and real reality have become indistinguishable. This is a real reality, and so it constantly like parallaxes the fake realities. It's like your fake reality, you're just brought right back in by it because it's completely grounded in our situation. It's grounded at a cellular level where we're grounded.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Interesting.
enough of a little, routing out. You should pick up.
Well, so there were two things that I wanted to um, circle back with. One was earlier in the conversation where you talked about the suicides of your sister, your brother, and your mother, and then the feedback that you got from that therapist, and it struck something in me, which I hadn't really thought of before, but it's actually kind of an interesting thought that in as much as we look around the world that we live in and we see, the bounty of nature and the beauty of spring, even though it's been canceled apparently, and all these wonderful things that we take into our bosom and say, oh my God, isn't it great to be alive and be on earth and babies and kittens and all that stuff, right? That the other side of that is that the universe is also a killing machine, right? I mean, that's kind of this other sort of like parallel thing that's going on,
Well,
and that
that's sort of that's the that's the material universe because it's a cycling machine. It's
right,
But
yeah,
I don't think I always think Adida. I'm not a was never a follower of hers, but I thought he was a brilliant thinker. And he said the universe is not a machine of obliteration. And the word obliteration always seemed the right word there. It doesn't obliterate souls. It does obliterate. I mean, obviously, it's on a scale that's unimaginable, a Star Wars scale of colliding galaxies and exploding stars.
Right. Yeah. Adida, also known as Da Lavananda, Da Free John, his various incarnations.
John, Franklin Jones.
Franklin Jones, Bubba Free John. We talked about him before.
With him, November 3rd. Not a
That's,
year, but a
so
birthday.
you share November 3rd with him? That's interesting. Yeah, I knew he was a Scorpio. We looked at his chart one night on the show. One of the things you and I were talking about before we went live was this idea of karma, because we were talking about it earlier in the week, and I was relaying a conversation that I'd had with one of my first spiritual teachers, who said that there's no such thing as karma, and that it's a concept on some level, and that it's sort of this agreed upon consensual concept. And it gave me like pause to think about it for a minute. But you got a chapter, Karma, Non-Duality, and Meaning, right here. And I'm wondering if you could, maybe talk a little about karma, what your thoughts on it are, and enlighten us a little bit here.
Well, I agree that it's a concept, and anything that we think up as a concept is a narrative that we that it's it's a way to give kind of continuity to our experiences. So I'm not going to sit here back and forth with you and say, oh no, karma is a real thing. On the other hand, my own read of it is that it's on a par with things like gravity, heat, consciousness. It's a real prime in all that is in the universe that we're in, and it's the embracing one. It's sort of like the gravity that drives gravity, or the heat that drives heat, but it carries over and it operates in terms of our actions and through our consciousness. Hence, it makes it so that our actions on a moral and ethical and on a basis and on a basis of spiritual freedom and our quest for our own spiritual freedom, karma is the kind of string that puts the beads together. It's the going back to John Friedlander's statement, it's the way in which the universe keeps re-optimizing itself for us. It may not feel like re-optimization, but that's because we operate under the illusion that only when good things or things that we want to happen are we on the right path. Often when good things happen, we're on the wrong path. Actually, the much maligned president, Mr. Trump, is a good example of somebody for whom the right things happen again and again and again, putting him more and more on the wrong path. He's like always wins, or if he doesn't win, he finds a way to cheat and win. It's like he's in a unique hell realm, like that hell realm in the old Twilight Zone where the guy dies and I forget what he's done, but he's a criminal.
He was like just a petty crook, and he was a gambler, and he kept,
How did I get to heaven?
because he was winning all the time.
Yeah, everything I want is here. And then it becomes horrific to get everything he wants. He suddenly realizes that this is not happiness. In fact, this is terrible. He says, I want to go to the other place. And they say, this is the other place. And
right. Because they reverse it for him. They say, okay, we'll take care of that for you. Then he just loses. He does nothing but lose. And then he hates that, right?
That's a different one. This one ends.
No, it's the same one. But then he comes back again. It's like, well, he's stuck. It's either all winning or all losing. There's no in between. Yeah. Yeah.
It's there's I think that the reason for this incarnation, which is an awfully pompous thing to say really at this point, but maybe a working reason, is that here is where we encounter the actual density of our soul. And that contains within it all these paradoxes and ambiguities and contradictions, which are real. They're part of the fabric, the essential fabric of being, meaning being at the origin of what being is, at the origin of, to use my subtitle, why there is something rather than nothing.
Right.
And this world is a reality construct that allows us to experience that. In my book, I don't really dawdle on, is it matter first or consciousness first? I try and find a point beneath that dichotomy, in which it's always both and everything, because what we're encountering is our own density and our own mass, meaning our psychic mass, our dimensional mass, you're an astrologer, our zodiacal mass.
Hmm.
We're encountering that here simultaneously all at once. And this is one of the few venues in creation where that can happen.
Hmm.
Nobody said it was supposed to be pleasant. All they said, I mean, the Sethian notion that it's a school is like, I think, a good fallback one. It's a school.
Hmm.
And that's its advantage. It's its disadvantage and its advantage. But in the long run, it's its advantage. I talk to John like maybe once a month, because he's kind of a teacher and also somebody whose books I put together, putting together a big book of his. And I complained to him a couple of months ago. I said, this is not how I want things to be working out. And I can think of so many better ways for things to be now. And he said, well, you may be saving yourself 20 or 30 lifetimes. And
That's right.
whether you believe that or not, I think it's a good kind of cue to the way in which we should think about it, which is that we're on a journey that's it's a big journey beyond our comprehension. And so you changed on my screen.
I did. I brought your titles up here, so I wanted to bring them in. Go ahead, keep going.
Oh.
Yeah.
So yeah, that in the bigger picture, which we don't see, these are the challenges, or what's interesting. And John has another comment that after life, it's really the most miserable moments that we savor and think about, because those are the moments that hit closest to our true nature.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I would agree with that. I brought this up here. This was, I believe, as of 2013. You may have to update this, but one of the titles that book that Richard was called "The Bardo of Waking Life." And the reason I wanted to point that out, because it feels like we're kind of in a Bardo state right now. You know, there was a reality prior to 3/11, and we're in this place now. And at some point, the switch is going to get flipped, but it's not going to be the same world. We're sort of in this Bardo, this collective Bardo. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, maybe, like what a Bardo is, and maybe how you might be able to reflect on this kind of current Bardo state that we're in?
Well, when I first heard the term, it was probably in the 60s when I was in college and read the Tibetan Book of the Dead and got the notion that the Bardo is what you pass through after you're alive and before you enter another state. But now I have a much more sophisticated view of that, which is that, well, it's the more accurate view from Buddhism, that a bardo is any state that you're in. There's the bardo of waking life. There's the bardo of dreaming. There's the bardo of death. There's bardo realms beyond our comprehension in which sentient spirits exist. So I took that book was done during a period of time between 2003 and roughly 2010, when I went back to my old 60s and 70s way of writing, just sort of writing a whole bunch of fragments. Because back then, one context after nested in the other. I started off wanting to write fiction just out of high school and into college, and got kind of co-opted into that world and was a miserable fiction writer.
Well, your nonfiction is like hyper nonfiction. It's a very interesting language set.
And then I met Robert Kelly, and he basically said, "Your this fiction you're writing is just corporate advertising stuff, and find a real language." And he helped, and so I wrote poems for a while, and then I thought, I'm not a poet, but I am working with meter and language, and revelation. So I went back to a poetry like prose, a prose with poetic measure. And when I was, and then those were the years I was in graduate school in anthropology and doing field work and teaching college for a while. And during those years, I wrote a lot of books, which could have been books of poems, but they were in prose. And then again, from 2003 to about 2010 or 11, I wrote 3 more that were like that, only in a very different mode, because I'd done a lot of kind of expository prose books on healing and cosmology and embryology and stuff in between. And those books were called On the Integration of Nature, which was a post 9/11 book, and then The Bardo of Waking Life, and then one called 2013, Raising the Earth to the Next Vibration. And that I probably should never called it that, because of course it dated it right away, but what's done is done. And obviously now we're working with yet another vibration, and this seems to me the biggest event of my lifetime, more so than certainly the 9/11 or the Islamic State and Syrian war. Those are big ones. The various
Vietnam. What about Vietnam? Where does it rank in relation to Vietnam?
Yeah, it's bigger than that because it's inescapable. You can't. There's no place to hide from it, and also it's stealth. It works. Not that Vietnam didn't in some ways.
But it was rudimentary stealth. It was, there was like, very kind of nascent or very, rudimentary stealth.
And Hiroshima is the one that comes closest to it, but Hiroshima is like one bullet. It's a very big bullet. It's bigger than COVID bullet, but you can sort of dodge if you dodge that bullet. Like the Cuban crisis was a good example. One phone call, and that was averted, narrowly averted, but it was averted. Some say by an intervention of spirits on another plane, but this one is not a single bullet thing. In fact, this one is just the opposite. Every bullet fissions into 1,000 other bullets. So,
right, exactly. Well, I wanted to give people a taste of your writing, and this one paragraph, I think, really kind of captures it in a certain way, and it's about karma. Karma predicates beingness and suffering, the cause or basis, ? That lies in some prior theogony or Apache dawn and reflects a latency beyond thought, a true bottoming out. As a temporal condition, nature is only conditional, dependent. Being is dependent too. I love how you go from a prior theogony to Apache dawn, right? I mean, that to me, there's a little bit further on. There's this. In antithesis to scientific dogma, which wipes out whole universes with the panache of keystrokes. I love that. Right. So these are, I think this is, it's not typical, but it begins to speak to some of the writing that you do at a really interesting, almost hyperfiction level. One of the, go ahead.
Remember that particular set of passages ends with something which I think is a great epigraph for what's happening now. It's something like, what is profoundly terrifying is terrifyingly profound.
Oh, I love that.
And
that's
that's
great.
how the universe works. And I actually apply it in the book. I'm talking about ISIS, the attempt of ISIS to scare, by like ritual beheadings and burnings and things. And then what the narco lords in Mexico do, they try and think of the most horrific crimes to just totally scare people, and they don't realize that they're actually driving those things into their own souls. And every territory they open, they're opening in themselves too, in the long game, the long game that we're playing.
Mhm.
And so that indulgence, the indulgence of the hitman, the indulgence of the warlord, does come back around at some level. And God, this is just such an irrelevant free connection, but I saw the pretty much the best movie I've seen in a long time, if not ever, in this regard. When I was in college, I got really taken with experimental films, and one of the ones I loved was Scorpio Rising, Kenneth Anger's.
I knew you were going to go with Anger. I just knew Anger was going to pop.
And
Interesting.
Kenneth Anger's ritual drama set to a 50s rock score of essentially motorcyclists in a death spiral, really a race. And it's a beautiful little filmic song that as much as Brakhage and Anger and Harry Smith and all are imitated in modern cinema, you don't see the actual kind of discipline, like tight discipline of like Kenneth Anger's ritual Crowley-eyed dramas on film. But there's a movie called Waves, which just came out, which is an absolutely perfect frame by frame. It's like a Sistine Chapel. It's so beautifully sculpted, and it's just as much a ritual drama, death spiral followed by a life phoenix as Scorpio Rising. So that movie Waves just sort of astonished me.
How long ago did you see it?
A couple of weeks ago.
So this is coming out. This is coming out of your liberation, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's certainly, I watched it in COVID time. I watched it because this is also a cue, everything that Lucas Hedges stars in is fantastic now. And that's why I rented it. He stars in the second half of it. And he stars in Ben is Back, which is the best movie about the opioid crisis, and it was directed by his father. And then he stars in Boy Erased, which is about gay conversion therapy. It's like he picks every edgy role for a young adult. That's right. You can play around with.
Yeah, let me get the sound up on this thing. We'll play the trailer for Waves.
Okay.
And then let's bring Steve on in a minute to see if we've got some questions from Chatlandia. So let's watch this trailer that Richard is talking about here. Here we go.
Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not rude. It doesn't boast. Love also forgets wrong.
I will always love you how I do.
It's been hard, hasn't it?
Let go of a prayer for you.
How you doing? How you doing with everything?
I'm good.
Just a sweet word.
You know it's okay if you're not.
The table is prepared for you.
I'm trying to give you the tools to succeed in this world. It's not easy out there. Everything I do is for y'all. Everything.
I know you're under a lot of pressure right now, but I'm just getting really scared.
But you'll have this place to call home.
Everything's gonna be okay, all right?
Always.
We're in this together.
Look at you!
What you mean, look at me?
knows I've held on to way too much hate in my life. But all we have is now. All we have is now.
You know what's wrong with the trailer is that it makes it seem like an episodic movie because it takes little slice scenes. It lacks the rhythm. What makes the whole thing work is that the rhythm never lets up, and the trailer doesn't have the rhythm. You can take my word for it on this.
Well, it looks like our second guest, Howard Storm. Do you know about Howard at all? He's in the chat, right? He's in the waiting room. I discovered Howard a couple weeks ago, and he was a professor in I think it was art history or architecture. He was with a group of his students in Paris I think it was 1986, and he suffers a perforated stomach while he's there in Paris, is hospitalized, and eventually he dies and winds up having this very painful, almost Jacob's ladder-like experience. And then he has this moment where he's descended upon by these demons. And then that moves to this kind of moment where he begins saying this simple prayer about Jesus. And then the next thing you know, the demons are gone, in comes Jesus. He's, hell taken up, and then he's brought to have the life review. And they basically say he saw his life in a very kind of direct and clear fashion. And then he winds up being moved back into his body. The surgeon shows up, and he's on his way to have the stomach fixed. And as a result of this, he winds up going into the seminary and becoming a minister. So I'm going to have Howard on when you and I say goodbye. But there's kind of a theme here today. And by the way, you're both Scorpios, which I thought was kind of interesting. But let me bring Steve on real quick. Howard, hang in there. I will get to you like in a couple of minutes. And let's see if we can bring Steve on and see if there's any.
Also the traffic.
Yeah, exactly. The traffic. Let's blame it on the traffic. Hey, Steve, I think you're Steve, you're unmuted, I think.
Right. I'm unmuted.
Yeah, good. So, yeah, let's get you back on video here. If you could do that, could you do your own video? Do I have to enable you?
Let's see. Yeah, I'm trying, but it's not.
I'll help you out here. Okay, hold on. There you go. So we have any questions for Richard here from Chatlandia?
Yeah, I want to combine some of these. Let me see. Lori Seiler asked, I'd be interested in his opinion of the likelihood we'll be able to shake our psychopathic masters this time. And one that goes along with that, HF Leo asked, if we take the shot or chip, will we be cut off from the heavens? So those two kind of go together.
Okay, that second question might be a better Howard Shore question, but what about it, Richard? Do we get to ditch the psychopaths? Are they part of the wake up process and kind of an essential ingredient?
We do. I think it's like little by little. I could be wrong, but I think what we do is we get to shift them a little bit, and maybe they become a bit less psychopathic. But I don't think that this is going to get rid of them as two different First Peoples it's sort of diviners of this, oracles of this have pointed out, if the earth really wanted to make its point, it wouldn't come with something like COVID, which is pretty gentle. I know some people don't think of it as gentle, but it's not Ebola, it's not anthrax. It's a really complex message. So I think that this is it's like a sorting, but it isn't the total the total kind of flip of reality. So I don't think so. Somebody did point out to me yesterday, I can't quite remember who. Oh, it was Rob Resney, actually, that we don't actually, there have been so many changes. I mean, this is just bringing it down to the little election. There have been so many changes that we don't even know who's gonna run anymore, because it keeps changing, and we may not see Biden versus Trump.
No, it's not going to happen. But Biden's on the bullet train to dementia. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and maybe it'll be Cuomo, which will be really interesting because
it'd be at least a better debate. You know, he can string some sentences together.
Right, he can string, and also, then we could have the the Queens, New York kind of gutter fight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right, exactly. Well, Richard, an hour is too short. We're going to have to do this again sometime. Love talking with you.
Yeah, we've done it off the internet plenty of times. We've gone on forever.
Yeah.
I met you in Cosmo.
Right. Cosmo, my dog.
Your dog read tarot and was psychic.
Right, exactly. So Cosmo's been replaced by Jasper, the Astro Cat. I don't know if you saw Jasper.
I did. He walked across for a while.
Yeah. But Richard was kind enough to let me squat in his warehouse against the probably the at times rantings of his wife. What is he doing down there? Why is he in that place? But Richard said, "Look, we get a night watchman for free." Okay.
The rantings were of the other publisher, Canary Press.
Okay. Yeah.
They were like, "Who is this scary guy who's living in the warehouse?" And so I went and talked to you. I said, "He's not scary."
Just because I was large, right? Just because I'm large.
You're larger than this screen gives him.
Anyway, that was how we started our friendship, and here we are many years later. And really want to thank you for that, and thank you for all of this. And let's get you back on sometime. And now that you got some wind in your sails with Inner Traditions, it's going to be a very interesting, next chapter in your life. And I'm looking forward to see what comes out of it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Robert.
Yeah,
great getting the book. Yeah.
Okay. Bye, Richard. All right, it's my good friend Richard Grossinger. Wow, great talking with him. Got a lot of stories about Richard, but I got a new, possibly, hopefully new friend here, and this is I'm going to bring him on right now. He's been waiting here in sort of purgatory for a little bit. You should be able to start your video, Howard. Be able to click that video icon. I think you're good to go. Let's see. Let me unmute you. You're unmuted, I believe. Let's see. Yeah. Are you there? Can you hear me? Let's try it again. Can you hear me, Howard?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. Are you able to use the video camera?
I keep clicking it, but it doesn't respond to it. I don't know.
Let me see if I can help you out there. It says allow panelists to start video. Let's try that. Try it again. You should be getting the video cue.
Yeah, I've clicked that several times. I don't know what. Oh, there we are.
There you are. Hey, nice to see you.
Well, for better or for worse, here I am.
Yeah. So happy Good Friday. We got to make mention of that. And I know that this is an important day and an important weekend for you in a lot of ways. And this weekend represents a resurrection story.
Yes.
And you've had your own resurrection story in your own life, which I've shared with people. I played your video last week on another show.
Oh.
And I tried to kind of get them up to speed. It's the one that's most popular on the internet, where you're talking about what's happening for you in Paris and being in the hospital and then being taken down the hall, and that journey. So some people are familiar with you in that regard, and how that changed your life in a huge way. And you were in academia, and then you moved out of academia and you went into the seminary. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. And what was that like for you in terms of that tradition or that transition? Because it seems like when you were talking about your experience, you were pretty articulate, and able to really kind of share at a certain level, even though at times you were choked up. And I would say, I would say even intellectual. And then you go into the seminary and begin to engage in some ways kind of a non-intellectual pursuit or tradition. What was that like for you?
Well, the whole transformation of my life was very difficult. I just want to mention a couple things. The first thing was I thought when I came back that I was going to be some kind of saint. And I pretty quickly found out that I weren't no saint at all. I was just a regular human being. And
Right.
any sainthood was pretty far off in the distance. Matter of fact, in the unforeseeable future. So I've been working on that part, trying to be a better human being. But I don't ever want to be a holy Joe. So giving up giving up my tenured full professor, department head thing that I worked all my life to achieve was a very painful decision because I love the students. I love being an art teacher, but I really felt that I could make a better contribution to the world by going full-time in the ministry. I'd become like the ultimate church lady. I mean, I was at the church all the time, volunteering for everything. I painted the nursery and taught Sunday school and, participated in the worship as liturgist and stuff like that. But I really felt that I wanted to pastor because I found that the church was made up of ordinary people. They weren't no saints either. And but they were all striving to have a relationship with God, whatever. Each one was individual, and for some of them, they were pretty fine human beings, and other people were pretty far from God. But it was a world that I wanted to participate in because they were seeking the truth. They were looking for something, same thing that I was trying to experience and live and pursue. Seminary was much more rigorous intellectually than my graduate work, which I did at the University of California, Berkeley, in art. The teachers took seminary training way too seriously, piled the work on us, but I loved it. And actually, if it weren't so expensive, because I was paying for it, it was very expensive, $300 a credit hour back then. This is in the late 80s, early 90s.
That is expensive. Absolutely.
I would have stayed in seminary for the rest of my life because I can't think of anything more fun than research and study and arguing. When I say arguing, I'm talking about intellectually arguing, disputing things and trying to assert, what is truth and what's reality, etc. It was so much fun. I just loved it. And if I could have, I would have stayed there for the rest of my life.
Right. Interesting. There was a real tradition of that in Christianity back in the Middle Ages, where people would look at doctrine and faith. People like Aquinas, and outside of that, Peter of Abelard. There was a real kind of intellectual pursuit that was based on this kind of fusion of intellect and faith. And I could see where that could probably appeal to somebody like you. That's interesting. So where did you study? Where was your seminary work done?
I went to the second largest Methodist seminary in the world, which is in Dayton, Ohio, United Theological Seminary. Duke University is the biggest. And I had really excellent professors.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So what was this is an interesting kind of, realization when you come out of this really life-changing experience. You believe that you're headed towards sainthood. What led you to believe that? Like the specialness of the experience, the vestige of the ego, that you shared a commonality with other people that had something like this? Where did that come from?
The primary source of it was Jesus, in the latter part of my near-death experience, showed me my life and answered all my questions and gave me a pretty clear understanding of what I had done wrong and what I'd done right, and what he wanted me to pursue, which was to be a left self-centered A-type personality. I was very driven. I was very successful being a driven person. So I thought I was like, sort of a super great guy or something, because I had the proof of my successes, but that was in an egotistical sense, walking over the backs of everybody around me, not
Right.
literally, but and what Jesus wanted me to do was to be less self-centered and put the needs and concerns of other people ahead of my own. And it's not easy because, the ego is always looking out for itself. And so what I've been trying to do, of course, is to rely more upon, there's different terms for it, but the cosmic consciousness, Christ consciousness of the world, and less on my own ego consciousness, which is very small. I often tell people I live like a dog, and I love dogs. I've always had dogs. I've got 2 dogs now, and I'm not. But prior to my experience, I lived like a dog. Whatever, get what I could get.
Right. Right.
Me.
Right. I understand that in my own experience in many ways. I was going to ask you. I wanted to ask you about your wife. Now, are you still married to the same woman? Did she stay with you? No. Okay. So that's interesting. I wanted to ask you about that because you were married at the time, and there was a woman, your wife, then standing next to you through the whole experience. You have this really kind of touching, very poignant kind of moment where you're saying goodbye, and then you come back and you've got this other reality. How did that impact your? If you want to talk about it, you don't have to, but how did that impact your marriage, and how did you integrate your relationship after your what we would call an NDE, so to speak?
Well, my ex-wife is an attorney, does a lot of divorces, and after a while, she decided she couldn't stand to live with me anymore because I guess she thought I'd gone too wacko, because I'd become really religious and a church guy and all that, and left the university, which horrified her because I took an enormous cut in pay, first going to seminary, and then, churches, the church paid literally 1/10 of what I made at the university. And when she left me, belatedly, I got her to go to marriage counseling, and the marriage counselor said it very well. She said, our lives had just gone in 2 different paths, and we were no longer compatible. And the marriage counselor said, you can't save this marriage no matter how much you pray or want to. That's not going to happen. Let it go.
Right. Right.
That was a shocker for me. I mean, it's really hard for me to let go of something that I thought was going to be forever.
Right. And especially because she was there for you in a very pivotal moment of your life, the before and after moment. Did you remarry?
Yeah, I had. So I was, kind of angry about women, and I thought I would never marry again. I thought having a nice, warm, fuzzy dog was enough comfort for me in life. And then I met this extraordinary, beautiful, loving, kind woman who shared the same faith that I shared. And we met in Al-Anon, which is a subsidiary of AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. And we started, I heard her story, and then she learned my story, and we started dating, and pretty soon we were kissing and hugging and thinking about getting married. It's just a pretty whirlwind thing.
That's a good story. Did she know anything about you, or did you have to kind of say, hey, I'm this guy and this is what I went through?
So we were taking a walk in the woods one day, and I'd asked her a lot of questions about her life, and she said, I don't know anything about you. Who are you? And I said, well, rather than me taking all your time, I said, I wrote a book and pretty much tells my story. So would you like to read the book? And it's short, not a difficult read. And she said, sure. So she read the book, and she went like, oh, wow, I had no idea.
That's how long ago was that when you guys met? And
15 years ago.
15 years ago. So one of the things that I was talking with my friend Richard about, who, by the way, interesting enough, is from the Berkeley area, and you went to school in Berkeley. So interesting kind of Berkeley connection there. One of the things that I was talking about with him, and And kind of a theme is sort of I had E. Michael Jones on. I don't know if you know Michael's work at all. He's an interesting character.
No, I do not.
Yeah. So we were talking about, for lack of a better term, the blessing of catastrophe.
Yeah.
And
good. I like it.
Yeah. And I was wondering maybe if you could maybe like kind of riff on that or give your perspective on the blessing of catastrophe.
Well, it would be fun if all life were mountaintop experiences where we could just live in ecstasy all the time. But, even Jesus had to come down from the mountain, from the Mount of Transfiguration. He had to come down from the mountain. And it's interesting because the first thing he does is he's confronted with challenges and disciples who don't get it at all. They're like kind of dumb, kind of thick-headed. And so not to be Debbie Downer, but every time I have a really, really good experience, a really good day or a week or something like that, I always in the back of my mind, well, and the next is going to be down in the valley of the shadow of death, where I'll fear no evil because God is with me. I had an interesting conversation at a funeral a few weeks ago. I did the funeral and real old time Baptist pastor came and he said, I want to tell you something. He said, in the 23rd Psalm, it says, as I go through the valley of the shadow of death, he said, we got to go through that valley. And it's an important part of life to do the mountaintops and the lows. But this whole life is, as a friend of mine once put it to me, it's school. This is school, and it wouldn't be any kind of school if there weren't challenges. And sometimes the challenges are a little overwhelming. I can't tell you the number of times I've said to God, God, can you back off on the drama just a little bit, please? It's a little too much drama for me right now. Can you ease it up just a little? I'm doing the best I can, but I don't know if I can handle much more of this.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I'm on your website right now, and I want to show people your book, which is My Descent into Death. And you'll see Howard here in front of a lovely stained glass window. And then Anne Rice supported your book, which is quite interesting. She wrote the foreword. She was a teacher. Her and her husband, Stan, taught at San Francisco State, where I went to college. And Anne had her own very interesting, I guess we'd say, conversion experience, as it were.
Yes.
How did you meet her? And what was it like connecting with her on a personal level and kind of maybe a philosophical level?
She contacted me when her husband had terminal cancer when they lived in New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
And she'd become interested in near-death experiences, and at that time had gone back to the Catholic Church, had a huge turnaround in her life because she had left the Catholic Church and left Christianity altogether. And now she'd just recently gone back to it, and she was also interested in trying to tell her husband about near-death experiences, trying to give him some comfort because his time in this world was coming to an end. So we had an email relationship, and it was very nice. We've only met once in person, and the foreword that she wrote to my book is extremely flattering. I wish it were as true what she said about me, but she's a really very kind, lovely person, and has written a lot of faith-based books, which she's taken a beating for because she had a following in the vampire world. A lot of people.
Sure. Anne was very gothic. I mean, that's how I would describe Anne Rice. Very gothic.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so they did not like it when she started writing Christian books and things like that. She wrote several books about Jesus, and she's a good woman. She has health problems, and she's had problems with the church. I don't want to go into her business, but I know about this stuff, and she's kind of given up on the institutional church, but not she's not given up on God or Christ or her faith.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That brings up a very interesting point in the history of the Catholic Church and various offshoots of the church. Mystics have been often labeled heretics.
Yeah.
Padre Pio was sequestered away and moved out of circulation because of the things that he could do. Teresa of Avila, very similar, again, sequestered, put away because of whatever it is she was experiencing. And you clearly had, for what I would call a mystical experience, even though you went into it from a hell realm to a non-hell realm. Have you ever been labeled a heretic by people inside of the church, or how have you had to deal with some of the aspersions that were kind of cast your way?
Well, the answer is yes. And it's really painful because I've spent since 1985, in other words, 35 years, my last 35 years, promoting Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior and telling people, find a church and go to it. I don't tell people what kind of church they go to. I just said, get serious about your faith. That's my wife, Marcia.
Howard, this is a very attractive woman.
Yeah. Oh, you're telling me.
Congratulations.
Thank
yes.
You. And she's more beautiful on the inside.
That was the other piece, and I was going to let you finish that one on. Yeah.
When I've gotten emails, mostly been emails or letters or whatever, denouncing me as a heretic, and that I'm Satan, and I'm turning people away from the true faith, and so that it's just like a real stab in the heart, because it's like, guys, I just came back from Africa. I just came back from Peru, evangelizing, speaking to thousands of people, promoting Jesus Christ. And you're telling me that, like, my message isn't, in accord with whatever your doctrine is and stuff like that. It's just like, give me a break. There's times when Christians spend so much time bashing each other, which is one of the things that I really don't like to do. Is I don't like to bash other people. I have friends that are Jehovah's Witnesses and real strict traditional Catholics and Southern Baptists and things like that. And I love them all. And you know what? When we put the essentials of the faith in the forefront, we don't have problems. When you get down to little details about what's the proper way to baptize, or what's the proper way to do communion, blah, 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 then you can start getting into arguments. But it's all nonsense. Those things are not important. Faith comes down to, I'll make it, I really believe it's this simple. Basically, observing the 10 Commandments to the best of your ability, and loving God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and loving your neighbor as yourself. If you do that, you got it. And everything else is window dressing.
Yeah. Amen to that. I would agree with that wholeheartedly. Do you think that some of the motivation of the people that you've experienced, what I'll label loosely as hate, would be jealousy? Are they jealous that you had this experience, that you were actually able to have this moment with Jesus? Do you think that's entered into it at all?
Well, I don't know my severest critics well enough, and I don't want to know them that well. But my guess is that is a real element, because there's a real commonality amongst them. It's like, how dare I say that I met Jesus? How dare I say that I know what Jesus wants? How dare I say that, I have this kind of relationship or intimacy with God? Who am I? I actually had another minister, denounce me at a big ministers meeting, told me that I was psychotic and had a Messiah complex. And it was really pretty embarrassing.
Project much there? Come on now.
Yeah.
I bet you if they could have spent even half a minute of their life experiencing what you experienced and how you articulately shared your experience, they'd have a very, very different point of view, right? When you get led down into that, what I call the hell realm, where you were bottomed out, there was no light, you had these people tearing at you, these I guess they would be demons or whatever, and whatever was going through your heart and your mind, the panic, the emptiness. If they could just have 30 seconds of that, they'd probably be whistling a very different tune. Am I right?
Well, I quite agree with you. I wouldn't want anyone. I wouldn't want Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Osama bin Laden. I wouldn't want anyone to experience what I've experienced. And the sad part is that a lot of people are, and some of those people that are going to experience that are churchgoers who think that they've got all the answers and they think they're living just right. But as it says in Matthew 25, Jesus said, you called me Lord, Lord, but I never knew you, because they aren't they aren't living and promoting harmony and love and peace and kindness. They're promoting dissension and bigotry. And by bigotry, I don't mean just racial bigotry. It's like, we're right, our tribe is right, and all you other guys are wrong, and you're all going to go to hell.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. On the flip side of that, you're also, or have been, kind of a bit of a celebrity in the near-death world, which is a very, very different kind of world than your post professorial life.
Yeah.
And in that world, right, are they willing to talk about your experience with Jesus? Well, that's really okay, but we really want to talk about is the near-death thing, right? Where do you fit in that world?
Well, there's a whole range of near-death experiencers, and I love being with them because we can speak in shorthand. Because what we know that, like, let me give you an example. When we say love, we know we're not talking about what people think of as love. We're talking about something much more intense and greater than our human concept of love. So it's really fun to be around them because we know that there's a depth of understanding, but also within the whole world of near-death experiences, there's the Christians, and then there's the non-Christians, and there's even a few people that think that Christianity is some form of bigotry. And I don't see it that way at all. I believe in a highly inclusive faith as opposed to an exclusive faith. I've had very profound relationships with Hindus and Muslims and Buddhists and other people of faith, and people of no identifiable faith who just are incredibly loving, kind people, but they're not churchy people.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I just want to say, I pastored churches for over 30 years, and I know what's wrong with the church. Nobody has to tell me what's wrong with the church. I totally get it.
Right. Right. So that's an interesting perspective. And earlier on, you maybe see if I can rephrase this correctly. You talked about cosmic consciousness or cosmic Christ consciousness. Is that the term that you use?
Yes.
Yeah, which is something I firmly believe in, and do my best to kind of anchor in my own life. And I think a number of people who are listening to the show or in the chat would do the same. Last week I had Dr. E. Michael Jones on. He talks about this concept of logos, and that this sense of logos is ascending now in our lives, and that he doesn't sweat anything because you're right there with him. Are you right there with him?
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. And he's like, hey, listen, I know how this turns out. It's going to be good. Right.
Right.
I know the ending. Yeah.
And the interesting thing about the book of Revelation, I took a class in the book of Revelation at a Catholic seminary. And the whole point of the book of Revelation, which people always want to focus on the dragons and the terror and the armies and the slaughter and the pestilence, stuff like that. That's not the point of that book at all. The whole point of the book of Revelation is exactly that it all turns out beautiful. I mean, we get a whole new world and a whole new relationship. It's literally heaven on earth is what's coming, and it's not that far away. And Jesus showed me that. Where
are we now? Let's talk about where we are now. It's Corona, COVID, planetary lockdown, in really strict rules being enforced, right? I mean, these are, 6 feet of separation, social distancing. You could only get essential services or essential goods. Feeling very, how do I say this? Babylonian in some ways, right? Yeah. It's feeling a lot of gravity right now.
Yeah.
So given that and your that your perspective, where you've been, your ability to think through things, analyze your relationship with faith, where are we now?
Well, of course, we're in a period of everyone has to make a lot of personal sacrifice. I'm fortunate because, I've got some pensions and my wife is working from home. And so she's got her income. So we're blessed that way. But, I can't go to church. I'm doing church on the computer, which is
How do you feel about that?
horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really painful for me. But because I love the community of church. I mean, I love the worship, but I also like just being around all the people that I enjoy being around. So it's a time of great personal sacrifice. But if I can be Pollyannish for a minute, my hope is that people being stuck at home with their families or their significant others, whatever, they're going to have to learn how to get along, how to be kinder, how to love and appreciate what they have. I've spent a lot of time with my wife, more than we ever have, except on vacations, and I'm spending a lot of time gardening. It's springtime, and really appreciating the daffodils and the red buds and the flowering pears, etc. So I hope that we all come out of this, because it's going to go on for a while more. This isn't ending at the end of this month. This is going to go on for months. That we will end up being more appreciative, kinder, and not taking our lives for granted. What a privilege it is to just be able to get up and go and do what you want to do. And like, hey, want to go to a movie? Want to go to a restaurant? Want to go to eat? Like, no. It's like, what are we having? We're having macaroni again for dinner. Oh, how nice.
Right. Yeah. Definitely a deeper level of appreciation. Even now, right? As we clear away some of the clutter and the noise, and we have those moments, maybe you in the garden or you over a candlelight dinner of macaroni and cheese.
Yeah. You got it.
Yeah. Appreciate those things. I wanted to ask you about another part of your experience, and one that doesn't get talked about as much as sort of your conversion in a lot of ways, and that's this prophecy that you sort of saw about America. Are you comfortable about talking about that? Or you are? Could you share with people what you saw during that moment? And it's not in the video, so I don't know a lot about it. And maybe you could kind of tell that story.
Okay. I asked Jesus about the future, and he said there's two possible futures. The first one is the one that God wants, which is that we will transition in a peaceful way into a significantly different world, a world of harmony and peace and love. And when that happens, God is going to allow us to have powers that are only hinted at in the Bible. And in modern terms, not biblical terms, modern terms, telepathic communication. We won't, in this future, we won't have to do space travel. We can connect with other intelligent and good beings throughout the whole universe, because the universe is full of life. And we will be able to heal people almost immediately. There will be no disease, because people will gather together and pray over a person and lay their hands on them, and they'll be healed. People will have very long and complete lives. And the focus of the world, I really want to get this in because it's a biggie, is the focus of the world will be on children. And that's what people will spend, everybody, not just teachers or pediatricians, but everybody will spend their time really focused on raising children in a loving and trusting environment. And people will live in complete harmony with nature. Okay, that's option one. Option two is that we continue doing what we're doing. And I've said this in church, that this is a continuation of the Roman Empire. I mean, people talk about the United States being a Christian country and stuff like that. I don't get that at all. I think we're just a more sophisticated version of the Roman Empire. And that if we continue on this course, what God is going to allow to happen. God's not going to make it happen. He's going to allow it to happen. It's going to collapse. We have a very fragile economy. We have a very fragile environment. We have a very fragile agricultural system. And when that collapses, the thing that what Jesus showed me reminded me a lot of the Mad Max movies, where the world breaks down into absolutely vicious, amoral gangs of people who literally murder a family because they suspect that they might have a few cans of food in the cupboard left, or they might have a can of gasoline in the garage. I mean, one of the things Jesus showed me was hard to read, so it's not that far away in my mind. They'll take a little child and beat them up and cut them up, dress them in rags and send them to your door begging for food. And then they're off hiding in the bushes across the street with automatic weapons to see if anybody comes to the door. And if you show any pity or sympathy for that child, you're dead.
So you were actually shown this vision.
Yes. Yes.
This is a very specific vision.
Yeah.
Like, this is not some kind of vague sort of like newsreel clipping of people holding their stomachs and, walking around full of hunger. Wow. That's very powerful.
Out of eventually that chaos will pass, and then the remnant that survives will be the people that somehow have managed to escape into extremely remote areas and lived in communities of peace and cooperation. Those will be the survivors, because the gangs will ultimately turn on themselves, and
absolutely. Yeah. Any hint geographically where it might be safe or out of the reach of these marauders?
As far away from other people as possible, but you have to live in community, because you can't do it in isolation.
No, you can't do it in isolation.
But I'm not a survivalist because I'm too old. I can't, I'm 73 years old and I can't. But I worry. I've got 10 grandkids, and I got a little 16-month-old granddaughter who's the most precious little creature that God ever made. And I think about her future, and boy, I sure don't want her to go through option 2.
Right.
Or any of my grandkids.
Right. Well, let's bring it back to our current time and what we're going through, which on some level is leaning towards some form of collapse with the economy, with what's going on at a larger scale. Do you feel like where we are is getting close to that continuum? Are we going to get close to this thing or back off? What's your take on the vision that you had and where we are right now?
I don't think this is it at all. I don't think this is the beginning of the end. And what I do hope is that this is the beginning of the beginning. What's it going to take for people to turn their lives around and become kinder, more compassionate, loving people? And hopefully this pandemic might produce that kind of fruit. That's what I'm hoping and praying for. I think a lot of people are having a wake-up call.
I'd agree with that. Yeah, I would agree with that. What's the mood like with the people that you pastor? Are they scared? Do they have anxiety? Are they seeing this as an opportunity to build their faith? All the above?
Yeah, it's a mix, but mostly people aren't upset. I think that the fact that social distancing and being locked down. I live in Kentucky, and we've got a pretty terrific governor, Andy Beshear, and Kentucky has not suffered terribly because he took this thing seriously very early on. Mm-hmm. Not too many cases of COVID-19 and not too very few deaths in this state. I think a lot of people are thinking, we can do this. We can beat this. I mean, it's a nasty disease. I mean, it's like being around a rabid dog, except it's an invisible rabid dog. Mm-hmm. You don't know who it's going to bite, but I think people are feeling like we're beating it.
Mm-hmm. Good. Another question I wanted to ask you before we bring Steve on, because I'm sure some people in chat will have some questions as well. In many cases, when people have an NDE, when they come back, they seem to have not just a different kind of awareness, but they may have different kind of gifts or get different kinds of abilities that they may not have had before the NDE.
Yes,
Was that part of your experience at all?
very much so. But I don't like to talk about it too much because it sounds like I'm bragging, because these gifts or abilities are not something that I generated by any means. I was as surprised as anyone that, matter of fact, sometimes it's been overwhelming to be able to have an awareness or a sensitivity that I didn't know was even possible.
Right. Right. So when you think about it in terms of option one, right, that there's going to be a world where we're going to live in a particular kind of way, where the 1/10 of what we are expands and the other 9/10 or whatever, were some of the things that you experienced after your NDE was like a window or an insight into some of those things?
Yes, very much so.
Okay, good. Well, why don't we bring Steve back on? And I'm sure we've got a ton of questions here in the last 10 minutes from Chatlandia. And let me unmute Steve, bring him back on camera. Hey, Steve, you're back with us.
Okay, you can hear me? Good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
All right, this has been interesting. And Howard, I have to say that I grew up in the church myself, and besides being a high school principal, my father was or is an ordained minister also. So let me think. Well, we've always heard, as above, so below, but also that the external world reflects the internal. And I'm wondering, let's see. Here's a question from Chris and Steve Crimmy. What does Howard think about the Passion Play being an initiation realized fully on Easter, but that a problem with the current state of Christianity is the focus is on the death for our sins and thus an interrupted initiation? So it's more death focused and maybe not so much on the life of Christ and how
or the resurrection, perhaps, right? Yeah.
Right.
Well, there's a number of different understandings of the atonement, which is the death and resurrection of Jesus. But a lot of the atonement is like, why did he have to sacrifice himself and die for our sins? And there's different interpretations of what that means. One of the more recent ones is that what he showed us was that death and suffering, because they go hand in hand, is not the thing that we should be fearing. One of the curious things about near-death experiences, Dr. Ken Ring at the University of Connecticut did a study and found that near-death experiences have no fear of death, which is the number one fear of all people. It is not public speaking, it's people are afraid of death. When I talk to other NDEers, we just see death as a transitional thing. The suffering part, to put it kindly, sucks. I mean, I don't want to suffer anymore. I've said to God, have I had my share of suffering? Can I skip the suffering part and just go to the fun stuff? Which probably isn't going to happen. But what we're looking for is life in the here and now. We should not be living in fear of death or obsessed with becoming immortal. Like, it's so funny. They talk about people, their fame will live forever. I mean, the Greeks were obsessed with that your name lives on forever and ever. And like, nobody's name lives on forever. Nobody can name more than, 4 Greek people, great. I mean, what we need to be focused on is in the here and now. And part of the here and now would be when the end comes, how do you do that? How do you relieve your family of their anxiety? How do you relieve them of their worry that this is the end of you, because dying is not the end. It's actually the beginning. So I don't want to sound, I mean, this may sound crazy, but I see the day that I leave this mortal coil, it's my birthday. It's when I become who I truly am.
Interesting. Yeah. What else, Steve? What else you got from Chatlandia?
Yeah, I'm wondering too, because we claim the victory, but so many Christians seem to be they're just sitting waiting. They're a little complacent in the victory, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on what our role today in the external world should be. I believe Jesus said, or I think Jesus said, heaven is spread upon the earth and men don't have eyes to see. So how much should we be sitting back, believing and waiting, or as my mother says, put legs on your prayers.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, the thing that I recite from my experience more often than anything else is I asked Jesus, if I were to come back to this world, this is when my hope was is that I was going to go on to heaven and not come back here, which any rational person would hope for, because heaven is a lot more fun, a lot nicer than this place. He said my job was to love the person that I was with. And I totally didn't understand that at all. I thought that was kind of simplistic and silly. And 35 years later, I'm still trying to figure out how to love the person that I'm with. And some days I do an okay job with that. And some days I totally mess it up. And it goes back to putting other people's needs and interests ahead of your own. When you're with like really kind, loving people, which is why I like to hang out in church, because people are on their best behavior at church. So, you get to see the good side of everybody, mostly at churches, hopefully. But in the real world, you meet people that are angry. You meet people that are, I was visiting my son-in-law, and when I was leaving, his neighbor pulled a gun on me and threatened my life. And it was like, oh, that's interesting. Totally out of the clear blue. And, my way of loving that man was I drove immediately to the police station and told them what had happened. And I said, I don't want to press charges, but I want to scare this guy so that he never does that again. And they went over and talked to him, and he lied and evaded it. And so I went to the assistant district attorney for the county that I live in, and he wrote this guy a very strong letter. And the guy has not threatened anybody in the neighborhood since. He was the neighborhood bully. He was the guy that always, when the kids' football or baseball landed in his yard, he'd run out and take it.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That kind of guy, Anyway, so the loving thing is not always, Hershey kisses and smiles and flowers. Sometimes the loving thing is, telling a person that their behavior is unacceptable and will not be tolerated.
Right. Absolutely. Yep. We have any more questions for Howard, Steve?
Yeah, let's see. What's Howard's opinion on Mary Magdalene, especially if she was the wife of Jesus or even his equal, but more, maybe speak to, the feminine, the divine feminine incarnate that was suppressed. That's from Mojo McMama in the chat room. But what are your thoughts on the divine feminine?
Well, the early church gave it much more emphasis, but when the misogynist church came into controlling the whole thing, when Constantine turned the church into a state religion, it became as misogynist, anti-feminist as the Greek and Roman culture, which was really, really oppressive to women. Women didn't have the status of cattle. Okay, I mean, seriously. And so there were churches that were founded by the apostle Mary Magdalene. And we know from archaeological evidence, because we found it carved in stone, which is, pretty good evidence that there were churches founded by her and named by her. And eventually what the church did, and I know you know this, they turned her into a prostitute, which is not in the Bible. and discredited her and diminished her. And they made Mary, the mother of Jesus, into an otherworldly creature. You know, I don't want to go into it. I don't want to bash the Catholic Church Mariology too much, but they turned her into an otherworldly creature rather than being like a really super great woman. So people need the feminine. One of the reasons why God made this whole marriage plan is men and women are so different. I really love Joel Gray's Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and we are put together in the traditional marriage to learn. And so my upbringing, my dad was a World War II veteran and stuff like that, hyper masculine, hyper, domineering. My mother was completely, I mean, totally 100% submissive to my father, including him beating her and her not complaining when she got beaten up. We need to learn from women and respect them and promote them, and they need to learn from us how to assert themselves and seek their own individuality and not live off men, and men shouldn't be in any ways living off women. We should be, it's not a matter of one dominates and the other submits. There's a thing called partnership. We can be partners in support and love and enhance each other. And I hope to God that I'm doing that in my relationship with my wife.
Right. I think our souls are equal, but here in the material, we have different roles that, like you said, in a partnership, they complement. And it's also for the family.
Yeah. But we also deny ourselves. Like, I got to tell you this little anecdote about it. I've always loved gardening, and mostly flowers. And for years and years and years, I would only garden like in the backyard where nobody could see me, because I was afraid people would think that I was a sissy if they saw me down on my hands and knees, weeding my flowers and planting, daffodils and stuff. And you know what? It's taken me decades, but now I am a proud gardener, and I'm not ashamed to be out in the front yard on my hands and knees, futzing with the plants. And I'm not ashamed to be seen loving my grandchildren and, playing on the floor with them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You got anything else, Steve?
I think that's good. We could probably go for another hour, I'm sure, but
yeah. Easily. Yeah. Yeah. So is your book still for sale, Howard?
Yes. Amazon, or can be ordered through bookstores. I also have 3 other books too, if anyone's interested.
Oh, really? What are those 3 other books? I didn't see them on your website. What are they?
One of them is kind of an autobiographical, like what my early childhood was like, and the things that I did in ministry. And I tried to be brutally honest about some of my successes and failures and things like that. And another book is called Befriend God, Life with Jesus. And it's a book exclusively about Jesus, and doesn't have any of anything about me in it. It's all about Jesus. And I worked on that book for decades, and I consider that to be my most important work. And another book, I wanted to write a book about how I see God working in the world. So I wrote it as a novel. People have said to me, this is awfully autobiographical. And I said, well, actually, it's got bits and pieces of lots of people in it. But what I was trying to do was tell the story of how God does work. Because I don't believe in magical thinking. Mm-hmm. I think that that's really wrong. But I do believe that there are miracles, and that God does help us find the way, primarily through the assistance of good people.
Mm-hmm. What about paintings? I see you got some paintings on your website too.
Oh yeah, I'm still painting, and nobody ever buys them, sadly, because I was always hoping that I would be rich and famous off it. But Hollywood's making a movie of my story, which may come out this year if I'm lucky. And Warner Brothers is doing it. And so maybe I'll achieve some notoriety from the movie.
Who is playing you?
I don't know. Brad Pitt? I don't know.
I'd put money on it. It might be Kirk Cameron. Just saying. Just saying. Well, Howard, it's been great to have you on. I was really I'm new to your story. I just discovered you about a month ago, and it's been out for a while. But I'm glad I did, and I'm glad we had you on today. So thank you for being here, and I hope you're able to communicate with your people and your ministry in person as quickly as possible.
Well, thank you. It's been great fun talking with you both. You've been very good, and I like the cat. What's his name?
This is Jasper.
Jasper, yeah.
Yes, he's a regular guest on the show. So.
He looks like he's quite comfortable.
Jasper is actually running things. I'm just along for the ride.
Yeah, right. I get it.
Yeah. Well, listen, take good care. Have a good Easter. And, when your movie comes out, let's have you back on and we'll talk again.
Great. Thanks. Happy Easter to both of you.
Thank you so much, Howard. Happy Easter.
Okay. That was Howard Storm. That was pretty cool, huh?
That was very cool. Yeah.
And it was like it exceeded what I thought he could bring to the table. Just a super nice guy, and interesting in that he's got these different relationships with these different worlds. There's the kind of the Christian world where he's sort of kind of heretical, and the NDE world where they may not want to talk about Christianity, and then he gets in the cosmic Christ consciousness stuff. I mean, that was really cool.
Yeah, he has a good handle on things. He's not, an extremist, on either way. And Mojo Big Mama says Howard is a sweet, gentle soul, very smart and insightful too. Thanks for inviting him on the FARcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then Richard, wasn't Richard great too?
Yeah. We have to have him back sometime.
Richard. He's an interesting character, and he's rubbed elbows and shoulders with a lot of really fascinating thinkers and minds. Terrence McKenna, so he's got a lot of stories to tell. Richard, it's interesting too because Richard and Howard are both Scorpios. Mm-hmm. Richard was actually calling us today or on Zoom in Berkeley, and that's where Howard did his undergrad work, was at Berkeley. And today's the Scorpio moon, so it's Scorpio Day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Oh, Howard's still here. How about that?
Be careful, we'll start over.
Yeah. So why don't we get on out of here? And I'll be back on Sunday night, hopefully on the other channel. I got to look into that. Got anything else you want to say, Steve?
No, I think it feels good. Good show. Both guests complimented each other, and feels good.
Okay. So you know what they say, use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay open what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. You've been watching the Friday FARcast. Thanks again, Steve. Great job today. And we'll be back on Sunday night. Bye for now.
Bye.